One of the first signs that something has deeply shifted in a relationship is not always found in words. It appears in energy. Human beings are emotional observers long before they are logical analysts. Long before the mind can explain what is happening, the body notices it. The atmosphere changes. The connection feels different. And many men ignore this because they've been taught to distrust their intuition and wait for undeniable proof. But relationships rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They fracture quietly through emotional distance, altered behavior, and subtle psychological withdrawal. A woman who is emotionally invested in you behaves with a certain natural openness. There is warmth in her attention. There is curiosity in the way she listens. Even during difficult periods, there is still emotional presence. But when another man enters the picture intimately, something often changes beneath the surface. Her emotional focus becomes divided, and divided attention always leaves traces. You may notice that she suddenly becomes colder without any clear explanation. Conversations that once felt effortless now feel forced. Her patience becomes shorter. She responds to affection with indifference instead of reciprocity. Eye contact decreases. Physical closeness feels mechanical, almost performative, as though she is present physically but absent mentally. What confuses many men is that these changes are often subtle in the beginning. She may still say, "I love you." She may still maintain routines. But emotionally, the relationship starts losing its depth. This is because guilt creates psychological tension. And people under psychological tension unconsciously distance themselves from the person they feel they are betraying. You also begin to notice an unusual defensiveness. Simple questions suddenly trigger irritation. She acts as though your observations are attacks. This happens because when someone is hiding something significant, even harmless curiosity feels threatening to them internally. The mind becomes hyper-alert, and instead of responding calmly, they overreact emotionally to protect the hidden truth. Another powerful sign is emotional disengagement during moments that once mattered. She no longer seems excited to share details about her day. She stops seeking your validation. Your presence begins to feel optional rather than valuable. This is critical because emotional investment always reveals itself through attention. Where attention goes, emotional energy follows. Now, this does not mean every distant woman is being unfaithful. People go through stress, depression, emotional confusion, and personal struggles. A mature man understands that. But the mistake many men make is ignoring repeated patterns because they fear the truth more than the uncertainty. And uncertainty slowly destroys self-respect. The deeper issue here is not simply betrayal, it is disconnection. Betrayal begins emotionally long before it becomes physical. A relationship dies in silence before it dies in action. And when you start feeling that eerie emotional emptiness from someone who once made you feel deeply seen, you cannot afford to ignore it. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones people tell you. They are the ones you tell yourself to avoid facing reality. One of the most revealing truths about human behavior is this. When a person's emotional world changes, their routines begin to change with it. People can hide words, they can control facial expressions, but sustaining a false reality over time is psychologically exhausting. Eventually, behavior starts exposing what the mouth is trying to conceal. This is why sudden changes in her habits, appearance, and daily routine should never be dismissed blindly. A woman who has become emotionally or physically involved with another man often begins reorganizing parts of her life in subtle but noticeable ways, not because she wants to get caught, but because new emotional stimulation naturally alters behavior patterns. You may notice she suddenly becomes unusually protective of her phone. It's always face down now. Notifications are hidden. She takes calls in another room. Her device, once casual and open around you, now feels guarded like a private vault. And what makes this important psychologically is not the phone itself. It is the shift in transparency. When secrecy increases suddenly without explanation, trust naturally begins to erode. Then there are the unexplained schedule changes. She becomes harder to reach at certain times. Simple questions about where she was suddenly receive vague or defensive answers. Her routine no longer feels stable, and human beings are creatures of patterns. When patterns abruptly change, there is always a reason beneath the surface. Another sign many men overlook is the sudden transformation in appearance and self-presentation. Now, self-improvement is healthy. Confidence is attractive, but context matters. If she suddenly begins investing extreme attention into how she looks while simultaneously becoming emotionally distant from you, that combination should not be ignored. New hairstyles, different perfumes, provocative clothing choices, intense gym motivation, or obsessive attention to validation on social media can sometimes signal that she is trying to capture or maintain someone else's attention. What makes this psychologically fascinating is that attraction often creates performance. When people become emotionally stimulated by someone new, they unconsciously elevate their effort levels. They become energized, more alert, more image conscious. This is not always intentional manipulation. It is human nature responding to novelty and desire. You may also sense a strange inconsistency in her energy. Some days she appears unusually happy and alive for no clear reason. Other days she becomes cold, irritated, or withdrawn toward you specifically. This emotional fluctuation often happens when someone is mentally balancing two realities at once. Guilt, excitement, anxiety, and emotional confusion begin colliding internally. And here is where many men make a critical mistake. They isolate each behavior individually instead of looking at the overall pattern. One strange schedule change means little. One guarded moment with a phone means little. But when secrecy, emotional distance, defensiveness, and behavioral transformation start appearing together, the pattern itself becomes the message. A wise man does not become paranoid over small details, but he also does not abandon his ability to observe reality. Because awareness is not insecurity. Awareness is intelligence applied to human behavior. And the moment someone's actions stop matching the reality they're trying to sell you, you must stop listening only to their words and start studying their patterns. There comes a moment in certain relationships where logic and emotion begin fighting each other inside your mind. Your eyes notice things your heart does not want to accept. And this is where many men begin betraying themselves. Not because they are weak, but because accepting painful truths requires enormous psychological courage. Your intuition is not magic. It is pattern recognition operating beneath conscious awareness. The human brain absorbs micro behaviors constantly, tone shifts, facial expressions, inconsistencies, emotional withdrawal, altered routines, changes in intimacy. Even when you cannot immediately explain what feels wrong, your nervous system often detects the shift long before your conscious mind fully understands it. This is why so many men describe the same experience after betrayal. They say, "I felt it before I knew it." That sentence matters. Because deep down, the signs were already speaking through behavior long before evidence appeared through facts. You may notice her stories no longer align naturally. Details change. Timelines feel inconsistent. Small contradictions begin appearing in casual conversations. And when questioned calmly instead of clarity, you receive irritation or emotional manipulation. Suddenly, you become the problem for simply observing what does not make sense. Psychologically, this happens because deception creates cognitive strain. The brain struggles to maintain false narratives consistently over time. The more complex the hidden reality becomes, the more difficult it is to keep every detail aligned. Eventually, cracks begin forming in the performance. Another thing men often describe is the strange feeling that intimacy itself has changed. Physical connection loses emotional depth. Affection becomes routine instead of genuine. There is a disconnect in her presence that words cannot fully explain. It feels as though she is sharing space with you while mentally existing somewhere else. And perhaps the most painful part is this: many men start questioning their own sanity instead of questioning the behavior that triggered their intuition in the first place. They overanalyze themselves, they suppress their instincts to appear secure. They convince themselves they are overthinking because they fear being seen as jealous or controlling. But there is a major difference between insecurity and intuition. Insecurity invents problems without evidence. Intuition notices repeated deviations from emotional consistency. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in observation. Now, this does not mean you should become paranoid or accusatory. Mature masculinity is calm, disciplined, and rational. But self-respect also requires honesty. If your spirit constantly feels unsettled around someone, if peace has been replaced with confusion, anxiety, and emotional instability, you must stop dismissing what your mind and body are trying to tell you, because relationships are not sustained by appearances. They are sustained by truth, emotional safety, and trust. And once trust begins dissolving, the relationship starts becoming psychologically corrosive. You begin losing clarity. Confidence weakens. Emotional exhaustion replaces connection. At some point, every man must decide whether he will keep ignoring the signals in order to preserve comfort, or face reality in order to preserve his dignity. Because the truth may hurt you once, but denial will quietly destroy you every single day.